The crisis in Ukraine is overshadowing a lot of other events unfolding around the world right now. And some of these events may actually be leading up to a much, much greater crisis. And of course, I'm talking about the West's seemingly eager desire to confront and provoke China. So I want to go over two of these events. The first one is this, from the Washington Post. China secretly building naval facility in Cambodia, Western officials say. The other one is this one. Trudeau calls China's close encounter with Canadian warplanes provocative. And in both of these cases, it's the West getting involved in something that is absolutely none of their business. It is in no way any of their business. And they're getting involved and they're trying to provoke a reaction from China over two situations that have absolutely nothing to do with the West on the other side of the planet, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. So let's talk about the secret Navy base first. This is the Washington Post article saying China is secretly building a naval facility in Cambodia for the exclusive use of its military, with both countries denying that is the case and taking extraordinary measures to conceal the operation, Western officials said. And these are Western officials who refuse to be named. They are anonymous. The Washington Post also goes on to say the establishment of a Chinese naval base in Cambodia, only its second such overseas post, and its first in the strategically significant Indo-Pacific region, is part of Beijing's strategy to build a network of military facilities around the world in support of its aspirations to become a true global power, the officials said. Now, just listen to that. They've only got possibly 2 bases overseas, total. And this from Al Jazeera just last year. This is the most recent number I could find. U.S. military presence around the world. The U.S. controls about 750 bases in at least 80 countries worldwide and spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined, which includes Russia and China. So if China wants to be, what did they say, a true global power, they've got a lot more bases to build. We'll have plenty of time, plenty of warning before it gets bad enough to justify the U.S. making it their business. What do they mean by strategically significant Indo-Pacific region? It's strategically significant because this is a region the U.S. presumes primacy over, and whose primacy is being threatened by a rising China. China is a country located in Asia. The United States is not. If any country should have some sort of leadership role over Asia, it should be the largest, most powerful, most prosperous country in Asia. It should not be a North American country on the other side of the Pacific. But of course, that's not how the U.S. sees it. And that's why China doing anything in Cambodia is an issue for the United States. Now, part of the Washington Post thesis here is that China is doing this and they're able to build these military bases across the region because they're coercing and threatening nations and exploiting them. The Washington Post says China is using a combination of coercion, punishment, and inducements in the diplomatic, economic, and military realms to bend nations to Beijing's interests. And that's all pure projection. That is what the United States does. That is what the United States is actually doing to Cambodia right now. And a good example of this is because of Cambodia's growing relationship with China, and China is a huge trade partner. It's a trading power. And every nation on earth wants to do business with China. It has a huge industrial base, and it has a huge capacity to build and expand infrastructure. So why wouldn't a country like Cambodia, a developing country, why wouldn't they want a better relationship with China? But for fostering that relationship, this is what the United States has done in response. U.S. orders arms embargo on Cambodia, cites Chinese influence, and they have these false human rights pretexts, and they claim that Cambodia's going after the political opposition and China is just doing business with Cambodia. They're not holding them up to any human rights standards, and that's something the U.S. is going to change, and they're going to do it through economic penalties. Obviously, that political opposition is a creation of the US. They want to install it into power. They want to remove the current Chinese-friendly government from power. That is the opposition themselves admitting that they are proxies of the US. They got caught admitting this. This is Kem Sokha. Right here, Kem Sokha is one of the two main opposition leaders. This is from the Phnom Penh Post. This is from a couple of years ago, 2017. But it's still relevant. You know, at one point in a video that he's in, he says, the US that has assisted me asked me to take the model from Yugoslavia, Serbia, where they can change the dictator Slobodan Milosevic. And then he says, I do not do anything at my own will. They're experts, professors at universities in Washington, D.C., Montreal, Canada, hired by the Americans in order to advise me on the strategy to change the dictator leader in Cambodia. That sounds like textbook color revolution to me. And that's what they were doing in Cambodia, because that's what they do everywhere. And Cambodia is hard on the opposition there because they are engaged in political sedition and even treason. So let's just suppose that Cambodia is allowing China to build some sort of secret military base on their territory. It would be secret because the Cambodian constitution really doesn't allow a foreign military to have a base or a permanent presence in their territory. If they are trying to bend the rules and make an exception, it might just be because the US is hard at work trying to turn Cambodia into another Ukraine. We started this video talking about Ukraine. Ukraine is a nation that the US subverted politically in 2014, ousted the elected government in 2014, installed a client regime in its place, and then began militarizing it, transforming it into a threat to Russia, a nation that had once been a close partner of Ukraine. And it has led up to what we see today. First, they had an 8-year war internally, the US-backed government in Kiev waging war on the Donbas region, 8 years, and now there's this conflict between Russia and Ukraine directly. So there's that. That's one event that was in the news this week, and it's one of these indicators of the ongoing confrontation brewing between the West and China. And it clearly is the US crossing an entire ocean to pick a fight with China and to get involved in its relations with other nations in Asia. Now there's this one. Let's get back to this one. Trudeau calls China's close encounter with Canadian warplanes provocative. Why were there Chinese warplanes anywhere near a Canadian warplane? How did that happen? Let's see. Let's read a little bit further. Canadian planes enforcing UN North Korea sanctions had to avoid colliding with Chinese jets in encounter in international airspace. I see. So Canadian warplanes, thousands of miles from Canadian territory, they were flying around North Korea and most likely China. North Korea and China are neighbors. So they're in international airspace, but they are closer to China than they are to Canada. And as a matter of fact, these Canadian planes are so close to China and North Korea and so far from Canada that when they're doing these missions, they are actually flying to and from Japan, not Canada. Now, the Chinese government, in this article from CTV News, this is Canadian media, China warns Canada over air patrols monitoring North Korea sanctions. If we come down here, the UN Security Council has never authorized any country to carry out military surveillance in the seas and airspace of other countries in the name of enforcing sanctions. That is what the foreign minister of China said. Now, let's just say that the UN did authorize that. Where is North Korea? North Korea is in Asia. The whole reason why there's UN sanctions in the first place is because supposedly North Korea poses a threat to everybody. And if they pose a threat to everybody, they should pose a threat most of all to their neighbors. If their neighbors are not the ones carrying out these patrols, if they ever were authorized by the UN, then why is it Canada taking it upon itself to carry out these patrols. As a matter of fact, if you look at the the enforcement of this UN, well, actually several UN resolutions regarding North Korea, you'll see that it's all rich white nations, and it is just a pretext for them to be in the region with military assets to militarize the region. And it has nothing to do with North Korea. It has everything to do with China, and China knows that. That is why they're sending their planes up there. And if it were the other way around, if it was Chinese warplanes based in Mexico, taking off from Mexico and flying up and down the shoreline of the US, I don't think Americans would be very happy about it. Least of all Americans in Washington, in the government. They and their allies are allowed to move military assets anywhere they want in Asia without question. And anyone is unreasonable for raising any questions or protests against it. Yet when China and Cambodia, two sovereign nations, decide to construct some sort of facility at a Cambodian naval base, that is suspicious. That is something the US wants to raise the alarm over. Why is that? Why is there this double standard? It is this American exceptionalism at work. It's the same American exceptionalism that saw the US meddling in Ukraine's internal political affairs from 2014 onward, while also protesting Russia's involvement regarding anything to do with Ukraine. When Russia was protecting the people of Crimea, when they held a referendum for Crimea to rejoin Russia, that was protested against by the US. Any sort of perceived involvement of Russia in the Donbas region, that was also condemned, all while the US was arming and training and funding Ukraine's military to enable them to continue waging war against the people of the Donbas region. It is American exceptionalism. It is America making the rules up as they go along, serving their own best interests at the cost of everyone else's interests, even when it is activity taking place in an entirely different part of the world from where the US is actually on the map. This is a problem. A nation with 750 military bases in 80 different countries, that is an empire. And an empire is going to chafe against all other nations because it is a nation that aspires to impose itself upon all other nations. All other nations have a right to push back against this. And what we see with China is a nation that is actually strong enough to push back and for the US to notice. This is going to continue escalating until one of two things. A conflict erupts between the US and China, or perhaps between a US proxy and China, just as we see happening in Ukraine right now. Or possibly, if the US decides to find a constructive role to play among all other nations in a multipolar world, rather than insisting on imposing itself upon all other nations in this perpetuation of its unipolar, rules-based international order. So we got to keep an eye on this. I just thought I'd shed some light on these events that are being overshadowed by the crisis in Ukraine. We need to keep an eye on it because they could potentially lead to something much, much worse than the crisis in Ukraine, if you can imagine that. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. In the video description below, you'll find other places you can find and follow my work, such as Telegram, Odyssey, and Rumble, just in case YouTube deletes my channel for some reason. My website is also listed in the video description below, landdestroyer.blogspot.com. My other website is down for the time being. I'm working on relaunching it. In the meantime, please visit my blog. All of the links to everything that I just discussed, they are all in the video description below, as are ways you can help support my work. You could do that through Buy Me a Coffee, through Patreon, and through PayPal. And to everyone who has been helping out, whether it's one-time donations, month-to-month memberships, or even if you're just sharing my work with others, I appreciate all of that help. I could not do this without it, so thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.